There's a secret running through the heart of the global economy, a pattern so powerful it's predicted every major financial disaster for the last 2 centuries. Yet, almost nobody talks about it. You won't hear about it in school, and your financial advisor probably doesn't even know it exists. The media? They're too busy chasing headlines to notice the quiet rhythm pulsing beneath the surface. But this pattern is real, and it's been hiding in plain sight, quietly shaping the rise and fall of fortunes, the booms and busts that define our lives. It's not a conspiracy theory or some wild guesswork. It's a cycle, as regular as the changing of the seasons. And it's been right again and again, predicting the crash of 1873, the devastation of 1929, and the chaos of 2008 with chilling accuracy. Now, for the first time in decades, this same pattern is flashing a warning sign, pointing directly at a year most people aren't even thinking about, 2026. Imagine being able to see the storm before anyone else even feels the wind. That's what understanding this hidden cycle can do. It's not about fear-mongering or doom and gloom predictions. It's about recognizing the signals that have always been there, quietly marking the moments when everything changes. Most people drift through life, trusting that the experts have it all figured out, that the system is too big to fail. But history tells a different story. Again and again, the world has been blindsided by economic disasters that, in hindsight, were entirely predictable. If only you knew where to look. The truth is, the biggest financial shocks don't come out of nowhere. They build up over years, even decades, following a pattern that's as old as modern capitalism itself. So why don't more people see it? Because the pattern hides in the data, buried beneath layers of noise and distraction. It's not taught in economics classes, and it doesn't fit the tidy narratives that fill the news. But for those who know where to look, the signs are unmistakable. The cycle is turning once again, and the next chapter is about to begin. The question is, will you be one of the few who sees it coming, or will you be caught off guard like everyone else? The answer could make all the difference when 2026 arrives. Think of the economy not as a straight line, but as a living, breathing cycle, one that moves through 4 distinct seasons, each with its own mood, opportunities, and dangers. This isn't just a metaphor. It's a pattern discovered nearly a century ago by a Russian economist named Kondratiev, who noticed that economies don't simply grow forever or collapse without warning. Instead, they follow a repeating rhythm, much like the changing of the seasons. Spring, summer, autumn, and winter, each phase brings its own set of rules, and understanding them can mean the difference between building wealth and losing everything. It all begins with spring, the season of renewal. After a devastating crisis, the economy starts to heal. Old debts are wiped out, failed businesses disappear, and new technologies begin to take root. Optimism is cautious but growing. This was the world after World War II. Cities rebuilt, highways stretched across continents, and innovations like television and computers began to change daily life. Debt levels are low, interest rates are manageable, and the seeds of future prosperity are quietly being planted. But spring doesn't last forever. Next comes summer, the boom years. The innovations of spring mature and spread, fueling rapid growth. Jobs are plentiful, wages rise, and everyone seems to be getting richer. The stock market climbs and confidence soars. This was the 1960s in America, a time of moon landings, suburban expansion, and a sense that prosperity would never end. But beneath the surface, trouble is brewing. As the good times roll on, people and businesses start to take on more debt, convinced that the party will never stop. Inflation begins to creep higher, and the seeds of the next phase are quietly sown. Then arrives autumn, the season of stagnation and denial. Growth slows, but few want to admit it. Inflation becomes a real problem, and central banks start raising interest rates to keep it in check. Asset prices, stocks, real estate, even collectibles soar to unsustainable heights as people chase quick profits instead of real value. Debt keeps piling up and the warning signs multiply. This was the 1970s and early 1980s. Stagflation, oil shocks, and a sense that the economy was stuck in the mud. Yet most people still believe the boom will return, ignoring the cracks forming beneath their feet. Finally, winter arrives, the season of reckoning. The debts accumulated during the previous phases become unpayable. Bubbles burst, banks fail, and unemployment surges. Panic sets in as the system purges its excesses. This is the Great Depression of the 1930s, when the stock market lost nearly 90% of its value and millions lost their jobs. It's the financial crisis of 2008, when banks collapsed and entire economies teetered on the edge. Winter is brutal, but it's also necessary. It clears out the dead wood, making room for the next spring to begin. What makes this cycle so powerful is its relentless regularity. No matter how advanced our technology becomes or how clever our financial tricks, the seasons keep turning. Right now, all the evidence suggests we're deep into the economic winter, a phase that always ends in crisis. But just as winter is followed by spring, every collapse eventually gives way to renewal. The key is knowing which season you're in and preparing before the storm hits. Because in the world of economic cycles, those who recognize the signs are the ones who survive and even thrive when the seasons change. And as you'll see, the signs of winter are all around us. But the story doesn't end here. The real question is, what happens when winter is delayed and the pressure keeps building? That's where things get truly dangerous. Most people look back at 2008 as the financial disaster of a lifetime, a once-in-a-generation meltdown that nearly brought the world to its knees. But what if I told you that 2008 wasn't the true end of the cycle? What if, instead of allowing the natural winter to run its course, the world's most powerful governments and central banks simply hit the pause button, setting the stage for an even bigger crisis down the road? That's exactly what happened. The 2008 financial crisis should have been the cleansing fire that burned away decades of reckless debt and speculation. Instead, it became the most dramatic example in history of what happens when you try to cheat the cycle. When the housing bubble burst and banks started to fail, panic swept across the globe. But rather than let the system reset, policymakers intervened with a force never seen before. Trillions of dollars were printed out of thin air. Interest rates were slashed to zero and kept there for years. Banks that should have gone under were bailed out, and the bad debts that should have been wiped clean were simply shifted from private balance sheets to the public ledger. The result? The pain of winter was postponed, but not erased. The debts didn't disappear, they just grew larger, hidden beneath a surface of artificial stability. This intervention created what economists now call the everything bubble. In the past, bubbles were usually confined to one sector: real estate in 2008, tech stocks in 2000, or the stock market in 1929. But after 2008, the flood of cheap money inflated everything at once. Stocks, bonds, real estate, even cryptocurrencies and collectibles all soared to record highs. It felt like a new era of endless prosperity, but beneath the surface, the risks were multiplying. Debt levels exploded, not just for individuals and corporations, but for entire governments. The world became addicted to easy money, and the natural cycle of boom and bust was thrown completely out of balance. But here's the catch. You can't postpone winter forever. Every time the cycle is delayed, the pressure builds. The imbalances grow larger, the bubbles get bigger, and the eventual reckoning becomes even more severe. By refusing to let the system reset in 2008, policymakers didn't solve the underlying problems. They just kicked the can down the road. Now, after more than a decade of artificial growth, the warning signs are everywhere. Debt is at record highs, asset prices are detached from reality, and the tools that once saved the system are running out of power. The next crisis won't just be another recession. It will be the true winter that 2008 was supposed to be. So, while most people believe the worst is behind us, the reality is far more dangerous. The cycle wasn't broken. It was only delayed. And the longer winter is postponed, the harsher it becomes when it finally arrives. The question isn't if the reckoning will come, but when. And all the evidence points to a convergence of risks that could make the next collapse even more devastating than anything we've seen before. The stage is set, the pressure is building, and the clock is ticking toward a moment that could redefine the global economy for a generation. But what makes the coming crisis truly unique isn't just its size. It's the way multiple cycles are now aligning, all pointing to the same narrow window in history. And that window is opening right now. If you think the next economic crisis will be just another blip on the radar, think again. What's brewing for 2026 isn't just a repeat of the past. It's a convergence of forces that could create the most severe financial storm in living memory. For the first time in nearly a century, three powerful cycles are all aligning at once, each one amplifying the risks of the others. The Kondratiev Wave, the debt supercycle, and the generational cycle, each has predicted major turning points in history, but never before have they all pointed to the same narrow window. This isn't speculation. It's a pattern that's been building for decades, and the evidence is now impossible to ignore. Let's start with the Kondratiev Wave, the long-term economic cycle that moves through its 4 seasons every 40 to 60 years. The last major winter phase hit in the 1930s, and the next was due around 2008. But as we've seen, that crisis was artificially delayed, pushing the true reckoning forward by nearly 2 decades. Add 50 to 60 years to the last major peak. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, and you land squarely in the 2020s. We're not just in the window, we're at the very heart of it. But that's only the beginning. Overlaying this is the debt supercycle, a pattern that tracks the rise and fall of global debt over 70 to 80 years. The last time the world hit maximum debt saturation was in the 1930s, right before the Great Depression. Add 80 years, and you arrive at the present day. The numbers are staggering. Global debt has soared to over $37 trillion, more than 3 times the world's annual economic output. Governments, corporations, and households are all stretched to the breaking point. When debt reaches these levels, history shows that a reset is inevitable. The only question is when the tipping point will arrive. But there's a third force at work, the generational cycle. Roughly every 80 to 90 years, a new generation rises to power, one that has no memory of the last great crisis. The lessons of the past are forgotten, and the same mistakes are made all over again. The last generational crisis peaked in the early 1930s. Fast forward 90 years, and here we are, with a new generation that's never experienced true economic catastrophe. This creates the perfect psychological conditions for risk-taking, denial, and ultimately panic when the cycle turns. What makes 2026 so dangerous is that all 3 cycles are now converging. The long wave, the debt supercycle, and the generational reset are all pointing to the same 5-year window, 2022 to 2027. And within that window, the data gets even more precise. Yield curve inversions, widening credit spreads, falling money velocity, and a looming commercial real estate crisis all point to late spring or early summer of 2026 as the moment when the system could reach maximum stress. It's not just one warning sign. It's a chorus of alarms, all sounding at once. This isn't about fear-mongering or wild predictions. It's about recognizing the rare moment when history, mathematics, and psychology all align. The last time we saw anything like this was nearly a century ago, and the aftermath reshaped the world. The difference now is that the stakes are even higher. The global economy is more interconnected, the debts are larger, and the tools for intervention are running out. When these cycles finally break, the impact won't be limited to one country or one sector. It will ripple across the entire world. So, as 2026 approaches, the question isn't whether a storm is coming. The question is whether you'll see it before it hits. Because when multiple cycles converge, the result isn't just a crisis, it's a perfect storm, and it's almost here. But the warning signs don't stop there. The next section reveals the specific indicators flashing red right now and why ignoring them could be the most expensive mistake of your life. If you know where to look, the economy is already sending out distress signals, loud, clear, and impossible to ignore for anyone paying attention. These aren't vague predictions or gut feelings. They're hard data points, each one a red flag that has flashed before every major crisis in modern history. The first and most reliable of these is the yield curve inversion. In simple terms, this happens when short-term interest rates rise above long-term rates, flipping the normal order of things. It's a rare event, and every single recession since 1950 has been preceded by it. No exceptions. In July 2022, the yield curve inverted and stayed that way for over 2 years, one of the longest stretches ever recorded. When it finally flipped back in September 2024, it started a countdown clock. Historically, a recession follows within 6 to 18 months. That puts us right in the danger zone, with the window closing in the spring of 2026. But the yield curve isn't the only alarm bell ringing. Corporate credit spreads, the gap between what safe companies and risky companies pay to borrow, are starting to widen. When investors get nervous, they demand higher returns to lend to weaker borrowers. This spread always blows out before a crisis, as fear replaces greed and money rushes to safety. In late 2023, these spreads began to widen after years of calm, and the pace has only accelerated through 2024. History shows that when this happens, a financial shock is never far behind. Add to this the velocity of money, a measure of how quickly cash moves through the economy. When people and businesses are confident, money changes hands rapidly, fueling growth. But when fear takes over, spending slows and money sits idle. The last peak in money velocity was in early 2022, and it's been dropping ever since. Every major recession in the past century has followed this same pattern. Then there's the mountain of consumer debt. Americans are now carrying record levels of credit card, auto loan, and student loan debt. Household debt as a percentage of disposable income is at historic highs, and the cost of servicing that debt is rising fast. When debt payments eat up more than 15% of income, a crisis usually follows within 18 months. We crossed that line in mid-2024, putting late 2025 and early 2026 squarely in the crosshairs. And it's not just households feeling the squeeze. Commercial real estate is facing a refinancing cliff, with $1.5 trillion in loans coming due between 2024 and 2027. Most of these loans were made when interest rates were near zero. Now, they're being reset at rates 2 or 3 times higher. Many buildings simply can't generate enough income to cover the new payments. As defaults rise, regional banks, already under pressure, could start to fail, freezing credit markets and triggering a broader collapse. All these signals are flashing at the same time, something that almost never happens. In isolation, any one of these would be cause for concern. Together, they paint a picture of an economy on the edge, with every warning light blinking red. The mainstream media might downplay these risks, and most experts will tell you not to worry. But history is clear. When these indicators line up, disaster is never far behind. The question isn't whether the warning signs are real. The question is whether you'll act on them before it's too late. Because once the dominoes start to fall, the window for preparation slams shut. And as you'll see in the next section, the scale of what's coming is unlike anything we've faced before. The everything bubble is about to burst, and when it does, there will be nowhere to hide. When the warning signs are this loud, the worst thing you can do is hope the storm will pass you by. History shows that those who survive and even thrive during economic winters aren't the ones who panic at the last minute or cling to wishful thinking. They're the ones who prepare early, act decisively, and refuse to follow the crowd off a cliff. So, what can you do right now to protect yourself and your future as the next great economic reset approaches? The answer isn't complicated, but it does require discipline, courage, and a willingness to go against the grain. First, take a hard look at your investments. If you're heavily exposed to stocks, especially the high-flying names that have soared during the boom, now is the time to reduce your risk. This doesn't mean selling everything and hiding under a mattress, but it does mean shifting from a growth-at-any-cost mindset to one focused on preservation. Consider trimming your stock holdings, especially in sectors that are most vulnerable to a downturn, and use the proceeds to build a cash reserve. Cash isn't exciting, but in a crisis, it's king. It gives you the flexibility to act when others are forced to sell, and it lets you buy valuable assets at fire sale prices when the dust settles. Next, get serious about debt. In good times, debt can be a tool for building wealth. But in a crisis, it becomes an anchor that drags you down just when you need to be nimble. If you're carrying high-interest consumer debt, credit cards, auto loans, personal loans, make paying it down your top priority. The less you owe, the more control you have over your own destiny. If you own real estate, especially investment properties with large mortgages, run the numbers honestly. Can you cover the payments if rents drop or vacancies rise? If not, consider selling before the market turns and locking in your gains while you still can. Diversification is another key to survival, but not the kind most people talk about. In a true economic winter, stocks and bonds can fall together, leaving traditional portfolios exposed. Instead, look for assets that hold value or even appreciate during times of crisis. Physical gold and silver, productive farmland, energy assets, and businesses that provide essential goods and services can all act as a hedge against financial chaos. These aren't speculative bets. They're insurance policies for your wealth. But perhaps the most important preparation is psychological. Economic winters test your resolve like nothing else. When markets are crashing, headlines are screaming, and everyone around you is panicking, the temptation to give up or make rash decisions is overwhelming. The people who come out on top are those who keep their heads, stick to their plan, and see opportunity where others see only disaster. Study the stories of those who bought stocks in the depths of the Great Depression or snapped up real estate after the 2008 crash. They didn't get lucky, they got prepared. Finally, remember that timing is never perfect. You don't have to predict the exact day the crisis will hit. What matters is that you start shifting your strategy now, gradually building resilience into your finances and your mindset. Sell a little, save a little, pay down a little more debt each month. By the time the first cracks appear, you'll be ready, not scrambling to catch up. The coming collapse isn't just a threat. It's also the greatest opportunity of a generation for those who are prepared. The question is, will you be one of them? The choice is yours, but the time to act is now.